Welcome back to The Quiet Part Out Loud. I'm Alex.
And I'm Nuvyn.
And today we are talking about a New York Times article that was first published as Did Women Ruin the Workplace? They received so much backlash on this title that they then changed the title, not the contents, but the title to Have Feminine Vices Taken Over the Workplace? And then finally, did liberal feminism ruin the workplace? So, Nuvyn, I know you listened to a podcast on this. Tell us about what you heard.
I mean, it was interesting. And I definitely like to listen to things that make me uncomfortable, because if I'm uncomfortable, that means I'm curious and I'm trying to figure something out. So this one definitely left me uncomfortable. In fact, I was driving and I remember being like, I'm speeding. Like I was, I don't know if that would work as an excuse for getting pulled over.
I was really angry.
I was sorry, officer. I was really mad at a podcast I was listening to. But, the concept, what struck me about this New York Times article and the podcast with the authors was that this attribution of feminine vices and virtue as contradicted with those of men. And so the assumption that there are particular female traits, strengths, vices that are counter to those of men. And so how has that influenced the workplace? And I think that's what this article was trying to lean into, albeit not very effectively. Because I think once you label things as liberal, feminist, or woke, you're already turning on or turning off like multiple segments of the population.
Yeah, it's very political. It becomes very political.
Yeah.
I think the interesting argument that I heard was, is it we continue on this path that we're on where we're, elevating women into the workplace, we're supporting these feminist traits or feminist vices, or do we go back to the 1950s where women stayed at home and men worked and men were the providers? And there's this kind of like, it's one way or another kind of conversation. And I don't think that that's the answer either.
Right. Yeah. I think there's a couple of things that I was struck by. The first is that women did not create the workplace. They walked into a workplace that was created by men, for men, predominantly, particularly in corporate America. And that is something that requires more analysis, more thought. I was listening to a podcast over the weekend about how women are inherently set up to fail in any professional endeavor, with the workplace being Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and school being Monday to Friday, 8 to 3:30, and 8 to noon on Fridays, already set up to fail. There's no way that you can balance both. But the idea that the workplace was not created with multiple interests, dynamics, scheduling conflicts, opportunities in mind, and that we continue to define the workplace as we see it, trying to then squeeze in different elements of what we call like feminine traits, is misguided.
Yeah. And I think it is really interesting to break it down that way, where there's these masculine traits and feminine traits, and there is, someone at work doing the work and there's someone at home doing home, where if we even broaden the conversation to the workplace was not built for working parents,
right?
It really is not. And so in a lot of our conversations, we find women who have managed to kind of game the system, where they get this like a little bit of flexibility in their work and they have been able to then be successful. But with the way that society is going, we have very active fathers and we have, co-parents, and we have all of these things where having kids makes successful work difficult. And so I don't actually think that it's being defined as feminine traits or feminine vices, but we're actually just opening up the workplace to humans, working parents.
Working parents with multiple obligations. If
Yeah.
you're not caring for kids, you're caring for your parents. I find the whole notion of feminine virtues really it makes actually my skin crawl. And we hear about it all the time when we think about women in leadership and what are the traits of a female leader that are somehow different than a male leader. And those ideas of like compassionate leadership and an active listener, and perhaps women are more patient than men. That bothers me as defining feminine traits.
I also think it's interesting that when you speak to women who have been in leadership or executive roles that are now in their kind of what Heather calls work retired, or what does she call it? Work graduated.
Right.
Often the way that they explain how they were successful is not that, oh, I embodied this masculine energy or I took on, the role of a man. What they have said is they navigated how to approach things. And it was, how do I speak to this person so that I can get my point across? It's not becoming more masculine or being more feminine. It's really connecting with different people in a different work style. And I don't think that all women are empathetic. And I don't think all women are community first. And so it's really frustrating to hear that there are specific traits that are being pushed back against because the workplace is being ruined.
By women.
By
liberal feminism.
Like empathy is a very important trait.
But would you say that's a feminine trait? See, for me, the whole notion that women and men embody different virtues and bring those to their professional lives, and as a result, that's why we need diversity, rubs me the wrong way. Because I can think of just as many empathetic male leaders as there are female leaders. And I think when we start to define virtue by gender, that's when things get tricky, because then our expectations of a female leader are fundamentally different than that of a male leader.
Absolutely. And that is in fact true, is that we actually have a very interesting guest at the Leadership Forum that speaks about those expectations of women being very different from the expectations of how they lead to how we speak about them leading. I do think that women have a different operating system. And I know just from how I know I'm trying to parent my children, boys' brains and girls' brains are different, and they respond to discipline differently, and they have specific interests that they gravitate towards. I do think that men and women are different physiologically, and maybe how that represents at work is different. But I don't think that how we show up as leaders needs to be different. And I think what we're talking about is leadership skills. Like empathy to me is a leadership skill.
And I think in this article around liberal feminism, there was an interesting dialogue between the two authors about like, what are those feminine virtues and vices? Like, what is a feminine vice? If we say, men are misogynistic and, like crackaroo jokes, and that's a male vice, which I find like ridiculous. What is a feminine vice? And then the authors really spoke to like being gossipy and stuff like that. That's when I wanted to run my car off the side of the road, and I realized I was going like 135 kilometers an hour and being like, I need to slow down here. Because I think for as long as we continue to define traits of leadership as either feminine or masculine, we will continue to have misguided expectations of female versus male leaders.
Absolutely. I agree.
And that continues to reinforce a narrative that is not helpful for men nor women.
I think what the point I was trying to make earlier is that there are ways of operating with humans, other humans that you work with that are not gendered. They're just, you know, more or less successful with when you're working interpersonally. So empathy is a skill that you should have as a leader. There is also room for command and control in, say, a crisis where you are now leading a team through something that needs a leader, needs that command. And so, yes, it's definitely been made a male trait and it has been leaned on for probably many hundreds of years, but there is a time and a place for that, whether you are male or female.
So, if you haven't listened to the podcast or read this article in the New York Times, I feel like you've probably been living under a rock because it's quite jarring, but it makes you think and it makes you question your own assumptions about men and women, our roles, our collective roles in the workplace, the sacrifices that we all have to make along the road of our professional journey, and what comes next for us as a society. So check it out. Interested to hear your thoughts. Did it lead you to speeding as much as it did me? The Quiet Part Out Loud is produced by Access Connects and brought to you by Oh wait, is there a sponsorship opportunity there? Learn more at accessconnects.com.